Week 2 of fantasy football is on tap, and we have the running back tier list, starts, sits, brand new usage, a ton of information to get into after week 1, so let's dive right into it. Starting off with the injury report, and we don't have a lot to talk about at this position. The only minor things that are affecting the running back position as of this recording about Friday afternoon: James Cook, limited practice on Wednesday with a hamstring injury. On Thursday, he returned in full. Maybe roster Ray Davis in case, but for the most part, it looks like James Cook is going to be fine. Jonathan Taylor got hurt at the end of week 1's game against the Miami Dolphins, but he is not on the injury report at all. So it appears we have a clean slate, a clean sheet as of Friday afternoon when I'm recording this. Any injury updates, I will drop in the pinned comment how it affects my rankings. But as of right now, it looks like we got a clean slate at the running back position. The only real factors are Roschon Johnson if he comes back, Jalen Wright if he comes back. That could maybe shake up those backfields. But for the most part, I think we'll be in pretty decent shape. Looking at the tier list, you see Bijan, Gibbs, McCaffrey, Henry, Chase Brown, and Saquon Barkley. That's the S tier of running back plays this week, the elite tier of running back plays this week. As I made reference to last week, the devs are working hard behind the scenes to be able to get player names and matchups and a little bit more details onto the tier list. So for now, we're going to swap back and forth between my actual create rankings tab and the tier list. So moving over to the actual rankings tab, you guys can see the PPR points per game last year, snap share, targets per game, and total yards per game last season. Again, still working on loading in those 2025 stats week by week. The elite RB1s, Bijan Robinson is the first guy versus Minnesota. They were 7th against fantasy football running backs combination of 2024 and week 1 of 2025. 15th ranked in rushing defense DVOA against DeAndre Swift last week. Last year, they were a top 5 matchup. So it appears they're a little bit more exploitable this season so far through one game than they were last year. The only saving grace for Bijan, because this is a tough matchup, is that the Vikings were 13th in running back targets allowed, and against the blitz, which they blitz at the highest rate in the NFL, there should be a lot of dump-off opportunities. And the second highest blitzing team in the NFL is the team that the Falcons just played in the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we saw Bijan Robinson have 100 yards receiving, and of course that long touchdown. So receiving yardage-wise, PPR points, Bijan will be just fine. Jahmyr Gibbs is my running back 2 in week 2. We have the Chicago Bears matchup, 31st against fantasy football running backs. This is a get-right spot for the Detroit Lions. The Lions got absolutely embarrassed by the Packers in week 1, 26.25 implied points for Detroit. Bears 31st against opposing running backs in week 1. They allowed Aaron Jones to get it done through the air. So I feel really good about Jahmyr Gibbs this week. Christian McCaffrey versus the New Orleans Saints is my running back 3 on the slate. 29th against fantasy football running backs. The Saints were not good against this position last year, and they weren't good against this position in week 1. James Conner finds the end zone. Trey Benson is efficient when he gets touches. There is no Brock Purdy in this game, and that's going to hurt the game environment overall, and especially for Christian McCaffrey, scoring opportunities. But Mac Jones, probably going to target him quite a bit. Should be a 5+ target per game option for as long as Brock Purdy is out, because I do think with Kittle injured, with Debo obviously gone, with Brandon Ayuk still on the mend, and Jennings maybe up in the air for if he's going to play in this game, they're going to need to throw the ball to somebody, and it's not going to be all Ricky Pearsall here. So Christian McCaffrey probably going to have a lot of targets in this one. Running back 4 for me in my rankings is Derrick Henry versus the Cleveland Browns. They were 6th against fantasy football running backs last year. The game script will dictate a lot here because they are 11.5-point favorites, and that means a ton of big dog. Everybody knows that if the Ravens are ahead, it's Derrick Henry in the 4th quarter, and nobody wants to tackle this dude when they're down 20 points. The matchup is tough. Chase Brown averaged 2 yards per carry last week. Even though he's not Derrick Henry, he's still a very good running back. 28.25 implied points for the Baltimore Ravens. That makes the big dog virtually untouchable in my rankings. Even though it's technically a bad matchup, I do think that by the 4th quarter, you'll see Derrick Henry's stat line flip completely on its head. Let's say they've tamed him for the first 3 quarters of the game, but the Ravens are up 10 points entering the 4th quarter. Well, it's big dog time, and it's probably not going to end well for the Cleveland Browns secondary. Chase Brown versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. This game environment is the highest over-under on the slate, 48.5 points. The Jags are 18th against fantasy running backs, combined 31st against running backs last season. But in week 1 of 2025, they shut down Chuba Hubbard for the most part to just 3.6 yards per carry. I would say this is still a get-right spot for Chase Brown. The Bengals are implied for the 4th most points on the entire slate. And like I said, this game has the highest over-under of any game on the slate. Closing out this tier, we have Saquon Barkley. I have him downgraded a little bit from where he would normally be like 1, 2, or 3, but it is a 47-point over-under against the Chiefs. They were 1st against fantasy running backs. They completely shut down Amari and Hampton in week 1. For my money, probably the best run defense in football. And in the Super Bowl last year, they completely shut down Saquon Barkley as well. The offense is implied for 24 points, and this game should be high scoring. So obviously you are still starting Saquon Barkley. Moving into the tier A plays here. This is the RB1s territory. Looking over at the tier list, you guys can see that is Devon Achane, Josh Jacobs, Bucky Irving, Breece Hall, James Conner, and Alvin Kamara. With these guys, Devon Achane first up has a matchup against the New England Patriots, the 14th ranked run defense in the NFL. The new look Patriots kind of shut down Ashton Jeanty last week after being a cupcake all of 2024. When the Patriots were on your schedule as a running back, you were probably going to have a great game, and it makes sense. Mike Vrabel comes in, he's probably going to preach tackling and discipline and all that kind of stuff. So they were very good against the run, specifically Ashton Jeanty in week number 1. Are the Dolphins already cooked? That's what I want to know from this game. If the Dolphins are cooked, that's going to really affect my opinion of Devon Achane going forward, or will they show some signs of life? Is Tua going to look a little bit better? Is Tyreek Waddle going to look a little bit better? Either way, Achane's going to be fine. He'll still probably be an RB1 type of projection because he has over 5 targets per game over his NFL career, and he had 4 targets per game in week 1 there. So how does Jalen Wright maybe affect this backfield is the only left question that we have unanswered here, because if Jalen Wright plays in this game, he's listed as questionable as of right now. That could shake up what the split and what the rotation looks like. Does he just take over whatever touches Ollie Gordon got, or is this now a 3-man committee, 3-man timeshare where, let's say, they shave 10-15% of the snaps off of Devon Achane and a couple of the carries? Well, that's going to affect his output. That's going to affect his workload, because he can only be an RB1 if he's getting all of that work, all of those routes, all of those targets, if the Dolphins are not going to be an explosive, exceptional offense like they were back in 2023. Running back 8 in my rankings was Josh Jacobs. He locked into my rankings as my running back 8, played on Thursday Night Football. A nice performance of 14.9 PPR points, and usage-wise, pretty much everything we're expecting. My running back 9 on the slate is Bucky Irving, going up against a top 5 run defense in the Houston Texans. Now, this is probably going to be yet another tough matchup for Bucky Irving. We saw him get there as a receiver against the Falcons, but he couldn't do anything on the ground. Without Tristan Wirfs, which is still a question mark because he has practiced in back-to-back days, which would be a huge boost for this team and a huge boost for this game if he's back, I can't count on a lot of rushing efficiency from Bucky Irving, because without Liam Cohen, who is the rushing architect of this offense, and without their best offensive lineman, Tristan Wirfs, they've shuffled the way that the offensive line is behaving. So there's like 3 guys playing out of position, and Irving's workload, while it was so much better in week 1 than it was in 2024, you see 77% of the snaps, 78% of the carries, 57% of the routes. Also carved out the majority of the 2-minute drill snaps, which is new for him. It looks like he's improved in pass protection specifically. That's all great. Until we see an efficient day for, rushing the football from Bucky Irving, he's going to continue to be a buy low, because I think that this legitimately could be a top 3 to 6 running back rest of season if he starts to play better and if the offense is able to get some push up front, which is probably only going to happen once Tristan Wirfs is back on the field. If it's not this week, it'll probably be next week based on practice trends. My running back 10 in my rankings is Breece Hall versus the Buffalo Bills, 32nd ranked run defense. Awesome game in week 1 from Breece Hall. In his career versus the Bills, he averages over 100 total yards per game. So he does really historically well against this team since 2022 when he entered the league. 9th in run blocking grade was the Jets offensive line in week 1. Armand Membu, Olu-Fashanu, those guys were really generating some push up front. And that's actually something that Breece Hall's never had in his career. The Jets' offensive lines were patchwork, not very good for the first couple seasons of Breece Hall's career. And Breece, with a good offensive line in front of him, is capable of housing any run, breaking off long chunk plays. 32% of the routes is a little bit too low. That's a number we want to see increase. 58% of the snaps, I think, is fine. I know they're going to use Braylon Allen a little bit. He's going to be a pest in the red zone, that type of thing. But I want to see Breece Hall get back up over 50% of the routes. He was 61% in 2024 because he was targeted on 25% of his routes in week 1, and that's a good thing because he's the second best receiver on the team, and we want to see Justin Fields throwing the football, so I actually like him to go higher than his 78.5 rushing and receiving yards total over on Underdog because, like I said, against this team, he's averaging over 100 in his career. Running back 11 in my rankings, James Conner versus the Panthers. This one's pretty straightforward. Spectacular matchup, 28th against fantasy running backs last year plus week 1. Travis Etienne rushed for like $150 against this defense last week. The workload from 2024 went down a little bit from James Conner. You see 64% of the snaps as opposed to like 75% like he was at last year. Trey Benson was, in fact, a bigger part of this backfield like they already talked about throughout the offseason, and he looked actually really good. And he did carve out some of those like third down snaps, long down and distance snaps. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on with James Conner is does that workload start to kind of take a little bit of a downtick so that he's more of a mid RB2 rest of the season as opposed to a high end RB2? That's kind of where my head is at with it because Benson is a good player and you want to get him involved. But James Conner, excellent matchup this week. He is absolutely going to crush. Running back 12, closing out this tier for me is Alvin Kamara versus the San Francisco 49ers. Kamara and the Saints, I think they're going to win this game because Mac Jones is starting for the 49ers and they're at home, New Orleans. If you can slow down Christian McCaffrey, like I said, there's no Ayuk, there's no Kittle, there's no Debo, obviously. There's no Juwan Jennings, potentially. He's not practicing. This is not the same 49ers team that we're used to seeing. So I love Kamara in this matchup. I think that he can be the engine of this offense. And of course, we know 82% of the snaps, 55% of the carries, 73% of the routes. Didn't actually even have that many targets in week one, but he is absolutely getting workhorse type of usage. But moving into the next tier of running backs, we have the high-end RB2s. And this is Travis Etienne, Kyren Williams, Jonathan Taylor, Chuba Hubbard, James Cook, and Amarian Hampton. Welcome to high-end RB2 territory, Travis Etienne, because I don't think a lot of people would have expected him to be here 2 weeks ago. But the Bengals defense, not a very good one against the run, 23rd against fantasy running backs. Travis Etienne with the great week one usage that we saw, 62% of the snaps. Now Tank Bigsby is gone. He's on the Eagles. Tootin is probably going to work in for like 5 to 10 touches per game, at least for the next month or so. I imagine this is going to be very clearly Travis Etienne's job. But when you think about it rationally, I think a lot of people, Danny included, of course, if you guys watch the Flock League vlog, are going to assume that Tootin is going to take over this backfield at some point. I just don't think that's the case. We got a former RB1 who's 26 years old, who's Trevor's best friend, who's played with him since 2017 at Clemson, and a new coach, new offensive mind, Liam Cohen, running this offense, and a suddenly top 10 performing run blocking offensive lines in week one versus they were 26th last year. So this offense is built a lot more to run the football than we're used to seeing. 48.5 point over under. Travis Etienne, the gravy train's probably going to keep rolling. And not to mention, too, Travis Etienne ran 45% of the routes in week one. We'll see what that looks like because LaQuint Allen will probably have an increased role as well. And I do think Tootin can run some routes. But I think that Travis will get the important stuff. We saw him 80% of the snaps in the 2-minute drill. I like him to go higher than 15.5 receiving yards over on Underdog. He had 39 receiving yards versus the Bengals the last time he played them in 2023. And then Dylan Sampson in week one had 8 targets versus this defense. So I think that him getting involved in the receiving game in a game environment that has a 48.5 point over under and the Jaguars are underdogs, I really like that for Travis Etienne. So I'm taking that one for pick number 2 of the underdog pick'em that we're building out here. Running back 14 in my rankings is Kyren Williams versus the Tennessee Titans. This game could be kind of a snoozer, low key. I mean, 41.5 point total. It's a good game script for Kyren Williams. 5.5 point favorites are the Los Angeles Rams. And Kyren's workload, more importantly, remained Kyren's workload. I think that was one big question mark for me as a Kyren manager in our listener league. Was Kyren Williams going to be the same 80+% snap share guy with Blake Corum there, with Jarquez Hunter added in the draft? And the answer through 1 week is yes. Because Jarquez Hunter, I don't even think was active for the game. And Blake Corum barely played sparingly, even despite the game environment not being great. In that game against the Texans, they had really no luck running the football at all. Running back 15 in my rankings is Jonathan Taylor versus the Denver Broncos, 26th ranked against the run. They are not easy to pass the football against, so generally I think this game might be lower scoring. The Colts are at home, which is great. Jonathan Taylor, though, has to be the engine of this offense for them to win this game because they're hard to throw the ball against. Michael Pittman is probably going to see a lot of Patrick Surtain. The rest of their secondary is very strong. Tony Pollard was shut down last week versus Denver. Before the game got out of hand versus Miami, Jonathan Taylor virtually played every single snap. So I know DJ Giddens had like 11 carries or whatever, but there's a very good chance that he is not involved unless Jonathan Taylor is injured or the game is out of hand the way that it was Colts and Dolphins last week. So yeah, Jonathan Taylor, very, very good option again this week. Running back 16, Chuba Hubbard versus the Arizona Cardinals. Chuba is one of my favorite plays this week. Solid day at the office versus Jacksonville, even though they played better as a run defense and it was only 3.6 yards per carry and Bryce Young really couldn't move the football through the air. The workload still looks RB1 caliber, which is what we care about. Dowdle mixed in a little bit more than any running backs mixed in this backfield last year. Chuba Hubbard last season was 75-80% of the snaps. This game, he was 66%. So is Rico going to be a bigger part of this backfield? I think he probably will be, to be honest. And looking forward at this game, this is a primo spot for Chuba Hubbard to have an efficient showing against the Cardinals, who were a bottom 6 run defense last year and weren't good in week 1 against Alvin Kamara. Higher than 0.5 rushing plus receiving touchdowns, basically an anytime touchdown pick is what I'm rolling with on Chuba Hubbard. Running back 17, James Cook versus the New York Jets. They are exactly league average against the run, but Jimmy Cooks, man, this guy saw more volume than usual. And this is a big headline for those of you guys that maybe aren't super excited about James Cook. I mean, he had 21 PPR points in the first game, so I can't imagine the manager who has James Cook is worried right now. But the usage specifically really increases his ceiling because last season he played just 49% of the snaps. Of course, he had 16 touchdowns or whatever, and people weren't thinking that was going to continue, and I didn't think that was going to continue either because averaging just 16 opportunities per game and finishing as a top 12 running back is really hard to do what James Cook did in 2024. And usually you need an elite offense to do it, which he plays in. But a 10% lower carry and 10% lower route share as well is not something that is going to be sustainable. So what did we need to see from James Cook this year? We need to see him take a step in the right direction in terms of his workload, and his snaps increased, his rushing attempt share increased, his routes increased, long down and distance 2-minute drill snapped increase as well. So that is great news. Ty Johnson used to completely take him off the field on third down. Ray Davis used to completely take him off the field on short down and distance, and that didn't happen in week 1. So if that continues, James Cook becomes more so a high-end RB2, low-end RB1, as opposed to like a mid RB2 like a lot of people were thinking. Running back 18 in my rankings is Amari Hampton versus the Las Vegas Raiders. They were 17th against the run last season. A lot of people pessimistic about Hampton, just a 59.0 rush grade in week 1. That's not great. That is definitely not what you want to see. But surrounding him were like Jahmyr Gibbs, ETN, Jonathan Taylor, Bijan was worse, Genty was worse, Walker was worse, Bucky was worse, CMC, Barkley were all worse than him in rushing grade among PFF. Again, say what you want about PFF grades, but he wasn't excellent. He wasn't terrible in week 1. Running backs like this, how Hampton runs the football and how he wins, are going to have 3 yards per carry games because he's a gap runner. He's the type of guy that you need to get the hole open for him. He can use his size, athleticism, break tackles, that kind of stuff. If the holes aren't there, which they weren't against the best run defense in the league last year with the Kansas City Chiefs in week 1, you got to get holes opened for this guy. And Joe Alt was exceptional at left tackle in that first game. So that's great news going forward. Amari Hampton, 81% of the snaps, 83% of the carries, 61% of the routes. Does that keep up? Does Najee get a bigger workload going forward? Probably marginally. I think it's probably going to be more like a 70, 75% snap share going forward. But nonetheless, buy low on Amari Hampton and make sure you are starting him this week. Staying in that same game, but moving over to the C-tier plays. We have Ashton Genty against the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, this is really low for where a lot of people are going to have Genty ranked. The Chargers, second best run defense in football last year and carrying into week 1. Pretty yikes efficiency from Ashton Genty. I think the rookie is kind of overwhelmed a little bit of the moment of playing in the NFL. In week 1, just 2 yards per carry, 55.1 rushing grade, 4 missed tackles on his 19 attempts. That is not great. I expect him to be the biggest buy low in fantasy after probably another down performance in week 2 versus the Chargers run defense. That forced Kansas City to abandon the run game entirely, just attempting 10 total rushes by Pacheco and Hunt. Still likely have to start him, but I am tempering my expectations for Genty. Again, excellent workload, 87% of the snaps, all of the important stuff in week 1, but the efficiency was not there. Ashton Genty lower than 15.35 fantasy points in half PPR is what I like. This will complete our pick'em entry. Of course, if you guys do want to tail this, we're going to do a flex here, so you only actually have to hit 3 of the 4 to be able to hit like a 2.5x if that ends up going. And then if it hits all 4, obviously you still get like a 6x. As always, if you guys are new and you want to tail this, sign up using code FSE. You can tail our entry. We've been hitting about 50% of them. We do want to get one of these big wins, big ones, 6, 10x type of slips. If you're feeling really ballsy, you could go for the 4 stack, no flex, 50% deposit bonus plus a gimme pick to boost this to a 10x if you guys are new. Link down below for that. Running back 20, Trevion Henderson versus the Miami Dolphins. 25th ranked against fantasy football running backs. Henderson week is coming, fellas. It's coming at some point. The Dolphins are a floating trash bag lost at sea, and I think that the rookie running back is about to have his breakout game with a monster touchdown run, a monster 5+ catch type of game. Hopefully the usage corrects itself because in week 1, Ramondre Stevenson outsnapped him 66 to 34%, but Henderson outscored him 11.1 PPR points because he had a 33% targets per route run. And if those snaps, those routes increase, I think we could see a breakout game from Trevion Henderson. So I don't want to miss that. I'm putting him in my lineup a little bit aggressively, maybe even a little bit prematurely, you might say, given the next guy that I'm about to talk about played 90% of the snaps in the first game. I just love this game environment for the Patriots and for Trevion Henderson. Running back 21 in my rankings, Tony Pollard versus the Los Angeles Rams. Pollard has a great workload, not a great offense or really a great matchup here, but Cam Ward looks solid in his debut. And I wouldn't really count on fireworks from the Titans offense, but I do think that Cam Ward elevates at least last year's Titans operation to the point that Tony Pollard can get things done on the ground. Of course, we saw Mason trade for Tony Pollard in the Flock League, and I'm kind of jealous that he got him for as little as he did because Bill Krosky-Merritt, even despite the Eckler injury, to me just doesn't really scream 90% of the snaps type of guy. Running back 22 in my rankings, Javonte Williams versus the New York Giants. They were 30th against fantasy running backs. If you drafted Javonte Williams, this is a hell of a start to the season for you because even though I would still lean on selling if you can, maybe wait a week because the 30th ranked Giants run defense and the Cowboys, who historically trounce the Giants, are coming to town. The Cowboys are favored by 6, implied points for the game 25 for Dallas. Javonte Williams being up at 80% of the snaps, 71% of the carries, 77% of the routes. Also really impressive to see. Let's see what Miles Sanders can do. Let's see if Jaden Blue is active for this game because I don't think that this workload will necessarily continue, but I do love the workload and I do love the game environment for Javonte Williams. Running back 23 in my rankings, Kenneth Walker versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. They were 15th against fantasy football running backs. For the love of God, Seattle, use Kenneth Walker instead of Zach Charbonnet. My bags depend on it. In the first quarter, Zach Charbonnet was mainly doing his damage then. Quarters 2 to 4, that's when Kenneth Walker got back into the game. So I'm not sure if they wanted to ease Kenneth Walker in because he was dealing with a foot injury in camp. If it happens again, where Charbonnet out-touches him, out-snaps him, like you see there, 59% of the snaps for Charbonnet, 41% for Walker. If it happens again, we're going to need the alarm bells off and start to panic on Kenneth Walker. But I'm waiting one more game to see what the usage looks like, and hopefully it corrects itself back to Kenneth Walker in his favor. Running back 24, closing out this tier is DeAndre Swift versus the Detroit Lions. It's a 46.5 point over-under. Swift revenge game, Ben Johnson revenge game. You basically just have to trust the touches here. The only real thing that could screw this up is that Roschon Johnson's coming back from injury. So maybe if you have an empty bench spot and you want to stash him, see what happens in this backfield, you could. Kyle Menengai, they talked about getting him more involved on the ground because DeAndre Swift wasn't overly efficient carrying the football, but I don't think he's going to be efficient again because the Lions have like a top 5 run defense from last year. So overall, probably not a great game environment for Swift in terms of rushing the football, but he can catch passes and he could probably score a touchdown in this game. Moving into the D tier plays, we have Isaiah Pacheco as my running back 25 versus the Philadelphia Eagles, 3rd best run defense in the NFL. Chiefs will run more than 10 times in this game. I'm going to wish it into existence because they ran the ball just 10 times against the Los Angeles Chargers. The Eagles are pretty much just as good as the Chargers on the ground, but I do think it was a Brazil game, Friday game, little bit of a weird thing. Similar to Kenneth Walker, I don't want to sound the alarm on the Pacheco panic meter because if things go poorly again and Kareem Hunt out-touches him and out-snaps him or something like that, then that will definitely not be great. But I do want to see Isaiah Pacheco in a game environment where it's close or the Chiefs are leading, and the Chiefs are at home in this game, and it's basically a pick 'em by Vegas. So I think that Pacheco, 15-plus carries, couple of targets, he should be able to get back on track in this one. I'm cautiously optimistic that that happens, and if it doesn't, I'm going to be a little bit worried. But generally, I think I'm feeling okay about Isaiah Pacheco. Dylan Sampson, my RB26, versus the Baltimore Ravens, 8th ranked against fantasy running backs. Wicked receiving usage, though. We saw it in week 1. He had 8 targets against the Bengals. Judkins may be set to make his debut. He met with the NFL on Wednesday, and he hasn't been suspended yet. There's been no news in regards to if he'll be suspended or whatever the case is. If that comes out since I'm recording this Friday afternoon, let me know if you guys see that. I will drop it in the pinned comment if anything changes, but Dylan Sampson for now, even if Judkins makes his debut, I expect him to probably be the guy who leads the team in snaps. I think he'll probably, Judkins will take away some snaps on early downs from Jerome Ford, take away some carries, but I want the receiving guy in this backfield right now because the Baltimore Ravens are 11.5 point favorites in this game. So I do think that Dylan Sampson can catch 6-7 passes again in week number 2. Running back 27, Tyrone Tracy versus the Dallas Cowboys, 21st against the fantasy football running back position. It was tough sledding in week 1. Cowboys' run defense looks legit. With Kenny Clark coming over, workload's great. The game script, not so much. So hopefully he gets another great workload. Hopefully the game stays close. It's a divisional matchup, but Tyrone Tracy could be at risk of getting completely game scripted out of this one if things do not go well for the Giants, which I don't think they will. Maybe we'll see a quarterback change. We have absolutely no idea at this point. Running back 28. Aaron Jones versus the Atlanta Falcons. Of the two, he's my preference. Jordan Mason, I know, outsnapped him in week 1, but this is kind of my pick for potential like shootout of the week. These two young quarterbacks, McCarthy and Penix, dueling blows in a dome in Georgia. Aaron Jones profiles as the better play for me because the Falcons are really tough on the ground, but weak through the air against running backs. Look at what Bucky Irving basically did against them last week. Running back 29 for me is J.K. Dobbins versus the Indianapolis Colts. 24th against fantasy football running backs. Again, Harvey and Dobbins. Let's see what this split looks like after another game, because we did hear reports that they want to get Harvey more involved. But I think Dobbins played well enough that he should be your preference of the two backs. Bill was my running back 30. He locked in there on Green Bay Thursday Night Football. Of course, he's now going to probably see an increased workload because Austin Eckler feared to have suffered a torn Achilles, and Jeremy McNichols will probably be a big waiver addition come next week on the wire. Going into the final tier of running backs, we have the flexes. David Montgomery, Jalen Warren, Zach Charbonnet, RJ Harvey, Jordan Mason, and Nick Chubb. With David Montgomery, you're basically just hoping he scores a touchdown against his former team, the Chicago Bears. That is exactly what you are looking for from him. Jalen Warren versus the Seattle Seahawks. Got to get a better workload. Why is Kenneth Gainwell involved? I have absolutely no idea, Arthur Smith, but you can seriously knock it off. Zach Charbonnet versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Again, I don't think it's going to be the Kenneth Walker gets phased out of the game plan decision yet again, but it could be. So got to keep Zach Charbonnet on the back burner just in case. RJ Harvey versus the Indianapolis Colts. Again, don't know what the backfield's going to look like yet, but versus the Indianapolis Colts, I do think RJ Harvey is a viable play because Dobbins and him could have a good game script. Jordan Mason versus the Falcons. I prefer Jones because of the game script, because of the passing involvement that Jones saw, but Jordan Mason did outcarry him, and he was the primary guy there, and I do think if there were goal line opportunities in this game, they would probably go to Jordan Mason. And then closing out this video is Nick Chubb versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Monday night. Brutal rushing matchup, but Nick Chubb does appear to be the starter of that team. So looking at the entire tier list, you guys can see it there. We are going to go through basically all of these tier lists every single Saturday. Running backs was this morning, obviously, and then you guys are going to see Danny's wide receivers this afternoon. So those were my top 36 running backs. Full rankings available over on flockfantasy.com. Code FSE. Get the season pass. It'll cover you. Get full weekly rankings, start, sit manifesto. All the matchup information that you guys saw on the screen to set your lineups and tons more. Rest of season rankings, trade calculator, my teams feature, everything over there. Check it out, flockfantasy.com. And of course, if you want to tailor pick'em entry, that'll also be linked down below in the pinned comment as well. Promo code FSE over on Underdog Fantasy. 50% deposit match up to $1,000. Leave any suggestions, comments in down below, and I'll try and answer as many start sits as I can. Subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Like the video if you can. So with that being said, peace out, and I'll talk to you soon.